A few years ago, my life was completely different. I was a happily married man with a beautiful wife. We were expecting a baby girl in the month of September, but before welcoming our child, my wife, Marie, passed away in a car crash. Marie and I were high school sweethearts. I had never loved anyone as much as her, so, after her death, my life was completely shattered. My mental health was so miserable, I inadvertently ruined all ties with my friends and family. I was living alone in our old apartment, getting unemployment support from the government. It was soon to be 2 years after my wife's death anniversary. On that day, I dreamt about her telling me to restart my life and let her go. The dream felt so real that when I woke up, I was in tears, and it felt like she was there with me. Maybe I had imagined all of that, but whatever it was definitely a wake-up call for me to start a new life. I began applying for new jobs, and fortunately got accepted into one. It was a 5-hour drive from where I was living, and it also provided accommodation to all its staff. That meant moving to a new place. I put my old apartment on sale, determined to begin my new life in Georgia. There were still 2 weeks left to join the new office, but my old apartment was already sold, so I decided to leave for Georgia and stay in an Airbnb for 2 weeks. My wife and I used to stay at several Airbnbs while vacationing, so I promptly booked one without doing much research. I had booked one away from the city and on a hilltop. All other properties had to be booked 2 days in advance, so there was no alternative left for me. As I reached the property, I was less disheartened. The house was quite exquisite. It was a 1-story wooden house that sat on the top of a little hill, surrounded by trees and a small pond, which was remarkably filthy, covered with leaves which had probably fallen from the trees. Apart from the pond, everything about the house was pleasing. I parked my car at the side of the property and began unloading my stuff. As I walked towards the front porch, I noticed a big lock on the door. My heart sank. I hadn't saved the contact number of the Airbnb owner. With the network connection barely working, I turned on my mobile data. It thankfully worked, but the owner had unlisted their property after I had booked it, so I couldn't find their contact number anymore. I seriously had no other option left at that point, so I took a rock and banged it on the lockbox until it broke, fully accepting that I'd have to pay for a new one. After that, I promptly unlatched the doors and stepped inside. Thankfully, the owner had just cleaned the house as well, so there was no dust lingering inside. There were 4 rooms inside: a living room, kitchen, bedroom, and a bathroom. I firmly laid open my suitcase and began to change into my pajamas. After a good 30-minute nap, I got up to prepare dinner. I opened up a can of beer and tossed some sausages on the pan. I was enjoying the night, and by 9 p.m., I was fully sprawled out on the couch with the TV on. Suddenly, I thought I heard a noise outside, followed by a loud bang on the front door. It seemed as though someone had deliberately tried to enter inside by banging on the door several times. My mind started racing, and my heart began to pound faster and faster with each bang. I ran towards the door and began to peek through the window. I couldn't find anyone there, so I blamed it on the branches hitting the house from the several trees that were lined up against it. Just as a general safety measure, I set up my wireless computer camera under the overhang on the porch, which would allow me to view the feed from my computer inside. Even though I was mildly concerned, nothing happened after that, and I eventually fell asleep. The next morning when I woke up, I glanced out of the front door window and noticed a trail of blood in the driveway, which I knew with certainty wasn't there the day before. Concerned, and also a little creeped out, I decided to follow them. The trail led across the street to a patch of forest, and I tried my best to track the trail of blood between the leaves and dirt. Not too far into the forest, I saw the corpse of a deer up ahead. I have a pretty light stomach, so once I saw that, I turned to head back to the Airbnb. Although I felt bad for the deer, I was a bit relieved to know that it was probably the cause of the noises I heard the night before. Tracking in a bit of mud on me, I decided to take a shower, mostly because of the fact that I hadn't taken one in 2 days. As I was in there, I could have sworn I heard footsteps, but when I stopped to listen, I couldn't hear anything else. I quickly washed off the shampoo on my head and got out of the shower. This was when things took a menacing turn. As I opened up the bathroom door, I noticed muddy footsteps around the entire interior of the house. I ran to my room and locked the door behind me, called the police, then ripped open the laptop to check my camera feed. As I was on the phone with dispatch, I couldn't believe what I saw on the feed. It was the owner of the property, who walked right in through the front door. I instantly relayed the information over the phone and continued to scroll through the feed as they dispatched officers. I scrolled all the way to the live feed, and she never exited through the front door. For all I knew, she was still inside somewhere, so I jumped out of the window and sprinted down the street. The police eventually showed up, and she was found sitting on the couch in the living room. Obviously violating the policies of Airbnb and the law, she was arrested. I later learned that she had been in a heated argument with her husband because she wasn't taking her prescribed antipsychotics and had stormed out of the house in a manic fit. The police followed the path of blood to the deer, only to find that it was missing its head. She was found with a gun and a bloody knife in her waistband in the Airbnb, so it's pretty safe to say that she was up to no good. I moved out the same day and found a hotel, and I've since moved into a new home. The house is only about 20 minutes away from me, and I have no intentions of ever going back. At the age of 36, I'd had enough of the discomfort of camping with my family every year. Between the hard, rocky ground beneath our sleeping bags and the occasional insect crawling across our faces in the middle of the night, my wife felt the same way, and we traded our camping gear for an annual Airbnb trip. For the past couple of years, it had been working out. We traveled to different places each year in highly wooded areas, so it was still similar to camping, minus the sleeping outside part. We had come across a listing of a wooden, rustic cabin hidden deep within Maine's lush woods. Its photograph showcased a picturesque 2-story building with a cozy wooden porch surrounded by towering trees. We were drawn to its promise of a peaceful, undisturbed stay. Upon our arrival, the cabin's cleanliness impressed us, and the keys were exactly where the host had mentioned. A small lockbox near the front door protected by a code. The messages from the host requested that we leave the key in the box once we gained access to the house, which was odd, but okay. Secluded as we were, I didn't think it would be a problem. Our first days in the cabin were filled with our typical vacation activities: fishing in a nearby river, hiking trails throughout the woods, and barbecuing. It was a great location for our trip, and everyone was content. On the 4th night, we were jolted awake by a thumping noise from the 1st floor. With my heart pounding, I grabbed the flashlight, then ventured downstairs to find the front door wide open. With dread creeping in, I closed the door, rechecked all the windows, and checked the cabin. Seeing nothing, I resolved to bring it up to the host in the morning. The host expressed genuine concern at what they considered to be a burglary attempt. However, nothing of value was missing or damaged. The local police were alerted and promised to have an officer swing by every night for the remainder of our stay, just in case, but the promise of a cruiser doing a drive-by once a night did little to soothe our unease. Despite our fear, we decided to see through the remainder of our stay. On the final night, we were jolted awake by my son's blood-curdling scream that echoed through the cabin. We rushed to him to find him quivering and pointing at the window. He was screaming that a man was looking in at him through the window. Several police swiftly arrived, and they searched through the entire cabin. They found no trace of any would-be intruder, leaving us with my son's terrifying claim and no answers. Later that night, after the police left, it dawned on me. The key that we had been diligently returning to the lockbox after every use, the one meant to secure our temporary home, was not in the lockbox where we had left it. It all made sense. Another call to the police confirmed our fears. When they came again, they searched the cabin again much more thoroughly. The key to the front door was found in the attic, and none of us had been up there. As a father whose main duty is to protect my family and keep them safe, the news was a punch in my gut. We packed up and left immediately, completely violated and disturbed from the whole incident. Upon hearing our unsettling account, Airbnb quickly responded. An investigation was promptly launched, and we received a full refund for our stay. In addition, they extended counseling services to help us navigate the emotional aftermath of the event. We were pretty positive that the host had been sneaking in, but it was later revealed that he was not responsible, apparently providing reasonable alibis to the police. During the investigation, the host told the police that he intended us to retain the key for our stay, then place it back into the box upon leaving. Even though the instructions were horribly written and misleading, it still didn't give us an answer as to who was sneaking in and out of the Airbnb. My only guess is that it was a former guest, but the police no longer seem to be interested in the case, and I don't even think they've looked into that possibility. Motivated by our unsettling experience, I began to delve into similar occurrences, wondering if we were alone in our experience. I found a handful of stories detailing Airbnb rentals that were quietly shared with uninvited guests or lingering previous occupants. Frogging is a term used to describe individuals secretly inhabiting others' homes without the knowledge or consent of the rightful residents. These intruders find refuge in hidden corners of the house, such as attics, basements, or even within the walls and crawl spaces, living out their days undetected. Reading about families unknowingly sharing their homes with these unwelcome guests was unsettling to hear, to say the least. Since the incident, we've continued our tradition of annual family retreats, but we're much more cautious now. Life has always been a nonstop whirlwind for me and my girlfriend. It's funny how you imagine adulthood as a kid, full of freedom, countless opportunities, and never having to listen to anyone. Well, the reality we discovered was far less glamorous. As 30-year-olds working in healthcare in the heart of the city, we often felt like hamsters running in an endless wheel, never being able to find balance between work, personal life, and our relationship. Working double shifts almost every day of the week, and only sleeping 4 to 5 hours a night, we needed a break. We both agreed on a tranquil getaway, basically anywhere far away from the city. Our search for a little vacation landed us on Airbnb, where we stumbled upon a woman named Martha's listing. It was a charming, secluded cottage in the countryside, way off the beaten path. It was precisely the kind of place that can make you forget your emails and deadlines, and that was what we needed. The pictures on the site were enticing, boasting lush green surroundings and an inviting, homely vibe. We didn't need much convincing, and booked it almost immediately. Martha promptly answered our questions online, and she really gave off a friendly vibe, giving off the impression of being a truly genuine and hospitable person. We were super excited to meet Martha, and finally, the day came. We hit the road, leaving behind the cluttered city for wide open fields and tall trees, and let me tell you, the cottage was just as gorgeous as the pictures showed. It had that cozy, nestled in nature vibe. We were totally blown away, and we were pretty optimistic for the week ahead. When we arrived, Martha personally greeted us with a warm welcome. She had baked us an entire sheet of cookies, and personally stocked her cabinets with food for us to eat. Martha really was godsend, and the week ahead of us was looking very promising. Over the first few days, I honestly felt like I was dreaming. Everything was the complete opposite of our usual fast-paced life. The air was clean and breathable, the stars were much more visible at night, and we actually felt relaxed for once. However, the seemingly perfect trip took a sudden turn on our third night. The forecast was calling for storms the whole night, and I could hear the heavy rain hitting the roof. We were upstairs, already drifting off to sleep, when suddenly, there was a loud crash from the kitchen. We shot out of bed and rushed downstairs, half expecting to find a broken window or some critter running away, but that wasn't the case. The back door was open, and our box of plastic utensils we brought with us was on the floor. We checked everything out, but besides the fallen stuff, nothing seemed out of place. It was definitely a little creepy, but we managed to convince ourselves that it was probably just a crazy gust of wind, considering we mistakenly left the windows open. We locked up the windows and headed back upstairs, though it was much harder to sleep after that. When morning finally came, we had pretty much forgotten about it, but as the day went on, we started noticing some strange things. My book wasn't where I left it, and my girlfriend's glasses seemed to have disappeared from her nightstand. It only continued to get weirder. That same night, my girlfriend noticed that some of the food from the fridge had vanished. It wasn't a whole lot, but it was just enough to make us question our own memories. After scouring the house for anything else out of the ordinary, we brushed it off and blamed it on our own forgetfulness. With that being said, there was one incident that couldn't be ignored. On our fifth night there, my girlfriend caught sight out of the window of a figure standing beneath a tree near the cottage, gazing up at our window. As soon as my girlfriend noticed this, the figure turned and walked away. We could barely make out who it was, but we chalked it up to someone taking a nighttime stroll in the area, although it definitely was odd. Another day passed without any issues, until we were out in the backyard on the sixth night. Martha had a hot tub that was open to guests in the backyard, so we were hanging out in there drinking some wine. Suddenly, my girlfriend's eyes widened, and she stopped talking. I froze for a couple seconds, not understanding what was going on, until she said, "Did you turn off the lights in the kitchen before we went out?" I glanced towards the house for a few seconds and replied, I don't think so. Why? She said that she was positive that we left the light on before we went out back, and after thinking about it some more myself, I started to realize that something didn't add up. The kitchen light is on the opposite side of the room from the back door, meaning that we would have had to walk across the room in the dark to get out, and neither of us remembered doing that. I suggested that the light bulb went out, which definitely could have been the case. It was either that or we were starting to lose our minds. I entered through the back while my girlfriend waited on the back deck, definitely a little creeped out. The light switch to the kitchen was turned off, so I decided to check the rest of the house, just to be safe. I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary until I went down in the basement. We briefly walked through it when Martha gave us a tour on our first day there, but none of us had been down there since. On the pool table, there were several open wrappers of granola bars, chips, and even a bag of the beef jerky we had brought with us. That was definitely not there before, and I knew my girlfriend hadn't been down there either, but I ran back up and asked her just to be sure. When she heard me ask that question, I knew for sure that something was wrong. Before calling the police, I called Martha to ask her if she'd visited the cottage, but she didn't pick up. I took no chances and called the police, so we waited on the deck until they arrived. The officers were a little confused as to why they were asked to be there, but we asked them to check the house just to make sure no one else was in there. They agreed, and we continued to wait outside with another police officer in the front yard. Suddenly, the officer's radio went off. "We need backup. Someone's in here." Before charging into the house, the officer seated us in his cruiser, then disappeared into the house through the front door. Over the next several minutes, more units began to arrive, and we watched as a few other officers walked into the house. Shortly after, our jaws dropped to the ground when we watched the officers escorting a bearded man out of the house. They put him in the back of a cruiser, then drove off. The officers that stayed came up to us and explained that there was a man living in the crawl space in the guest bedroom. My girlfriend and I couldn't believe it, realizing that every oddity we encountered was not just us losing our minds. Martha ended up giving us a full refund for the stay, and we drove home that same night. It turns out that both my book and my wife's glasses were found in the crawl space. We never drove back there to retrieve them, since they were awful reminders that we were not alone during our entire trip. The man had acquired a spare key from under the doormat on the back deck, so neither Martha or the officers knew how long he'd been living there. Once we learned all this information, my wife decided to read through every review on the cottage, and one of the reviews from 3 months ago left us frozen. Very nice house, but no joke there might be a ghost living there. Several items we packed with us went missing, and we kept hearing strange noises in the walls at night. Reading that comment was incredibly disturbing, especially knowing that it's been the same guy all along. After that trip, our Airbnb days were over,